Hello, Zaria. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
No problem. All right. While we're waiting to see if anyone else shows up, because tonight's session, I don't have any kind of scheduled lecture. I just completed the first two lectures for Unit 4. I'll get those posted tomorrow,
Okay.
and I might get another part of Unit 4 done later. But anyway, so I don't have any lecture planned for tonight. My main goal is just to review for the quiz, which opens up at 9. And that's what I'm going to be doing. But before we get started, do you have any questions, anything you want answers for on any homeworks or anything like that?
Um, Let me see. No, not at the moment. Maybe not right now at this moment. Mm-mm.
No,
Well,
get easy.
actually, can you go over um with the design sketches and stuff? Was the first one that I did pretty accurate? Just so I can know for the next one.
Um, yeah, I could do that. Let's see. Um, you're talking about design sketch number 1,
Yeah, because I noticed we have another one due tomorrow.
right? And the design sketch number 2 is due tonight. And unfortunately, I guess I could look at yours for a second because I'm not on share screen at the moment. Let me pull up grades for a second, and I can look at it. Um, Noah, do you have any questions for me while I am getting some stuff organized here for Zaria?
Yes, sir. Maybe this may just be because I haven't watched the right videos, um, or something. But
Uh,
on design sketch number two,
yes.
um, let me find where the way. Let me make sure I word this right. I'm sorry, all this stuff's new to me, so I'm trying to make sure I word all this stuff right when I ask you. Um, it says for us to uh show or create something that shows a negative image.
No, I think it's like, hold on a second. Let me read the assignment description. I think it might be something about um, okay. Designs should demonstrate three different ways of creating shapes while simultaneously demonstrating different kinds of. Oh, are you talking about the analysis?
That maybe that's
Finding,
what it was. I
right.
don't see it here now that I'm looking at it, so I
Okay.
don't remember where I read that actually.
Okay. On part 2, find an image of a work that has some very active and interesting negative shapes. Okay. So negative shapes doesn't mean negative like as in bad, right?
Yes, sir.
Negative shapes just mean the opposite of positive shapes, right? Like that in a design, you have positive shapes and negative shapes. Positive shapes tend to come forward, negative shapes tend to go back. So find an image of a work that has some very active and interesting negative shapes or negative space shapes, if you want to think of them that way. Then print out a copy of that image, right? If you can't print it, as I've said before, you can always do like use it on like a tablet.
Yes, sir.
You're tracing on them. Okay. Make sure your image is small enough to fit in your sketchbook. Next, overlay the image with a piece of tracing paper, draw the border, and then trace the negative space shapes that you want to highlight and then fill them in either using a dark pencil or like a Sharpie marker.
Okay.
So it's basically just find an image that has an interesting set of negative space shapes and then show them to me. Say, look at this interesting negative space shape. And the way you show it to me is by filling it in black and go, and then that's the only thing I see, right?
I got you.
The first part is for you to do two thumbnails and one finished 4x4 design. And that's where you demonstrate three different ways of creating shape. Do you remember? That's from the previous lecture. So there was a lecture about figure ground, right? Do you remember
Yes, sir.
that lecture? Before that, I talked about shapes and I talked about the three main ways of making shapes. And that was primarily delineation and then shape fill, like basically like either, you cut out a green piece of paper, put it on a red piece of paper. The green triangle on the red piece of paper is a triangle just because it's a different color, right? Or through implied shape. And I can pull up that lecture if you want to see that more clearly. But first, I need to get to Zaria's question.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You're good.
Which was, what you did for design one, you did everything right, except you only showed me your tracing paper. You didn't show me the original image of the Keith Haring design. Right?
Oh, okay.
Right.
You know.
You want to, so I just need to see that a little bit so I can see what it was you were looking at and then what decisions you made about it. I mean, I know Keith Haring's work pretty well, so I was not lost as to what you were talking about there. But sometimes people pick artwork I've never seen before, and then it's good to have the original so I can compare what your analysis is saying versus what I see in the artwork. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. I got you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, oh, and Cora's here as well. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share screen for a second, and I'm going to close that because I don't want to share that on share screen. I'm going to share screen, and we're going to look at maybe unit 2, the design lecture, just to better answer Noah's question. Cora, do you have any questions?
No, sir, not at this time.
Okay. All right. Well, I will, let's pull up. So where is that? Somewhere around here. I got folders. There's a bar. Okay, where is scene 4? So Noah, we were talking about shapes and the different ways of creating shapes. And so pull up that lecture. There we go. Okay, so at this part of the lecture, this is before I'm getting to like figure ground, and I'm covering the idea of three main ways of making shapes, right? No, are you with me?
Yes, sir.
So
My mic's been muted. I didn't realize it.
right.
I apologize.
The simplest and easiest way to make a shape is delineation, right? Or
Yes.
it's the most obvious one. It's like if I was to like walk into a classroom without telling anyone anything, just hand out pencils to everyone and pieces of paper and say, draw me a triangle. 99.9% of the people would all draw me a triangle the exact same way, which is they would just draw a line around a triangle, right? That's the most obvious way. Like in our mind, almost that is synonymous with drawing a triangle. But really, that's only one way to draw a triangle, right? And essentially, you're not doing that much other than saying, here's the boundary of the triangle. And you're saying everything that's inside this line is the triangle. Everything that's outside the line is not the triangle. But we can make triangles lots of other ways. We can cut paper, right? And then put it on another piece of paper. We can paint a triangle. We could fill it in charcoal or draw all the negative space in charcoal and leave the area that's white, the triangle, right? All of those are what we would call color fill or value fill ways of making a triangle, right? But there is a third way, and it's the third way that's really the most interesting and most complex, and because it primarily uses our brain to make the triangle. And that third way is through grouping or implied shape. Like this is probably one of my favorite examples of a way to make a triangle, right? Like that our eye can see this triangle clearly, and yet it's not there, right? Does that make sense? There is no triangle. It's just that this line where's my cursor? This line ends there and there. And
Yes.
then that circle gets cut into. It's because all those things come together that we believe we see a triangle. Okay, the next page has more examples all on the idea of implied shapes, right? So we've got another kind of implied triangle. This type of implied triangle and that kind of implied triangle are very similar, right? But we could also do the same thing where what if I had a triangle where all the lines were going horizontal for the triangle, but then outside the triangle, all the lines were the exact same spacing, but they were all verticals, right? We'd still see the triangle, even though there'd be almost no value difference between the negative space and the positive space, but we'd still see the triangle. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So these are all different kinds of implied ways to make shapes, right? And so that's what I'm asking you to demonstrate is come up with some interesting, you can look at this page. You can find this as a PDF and a PowerPoint on modules. And you could use this page as a guide if you want to, or you can try to like put this away, say, all right, I understand, and come up with novel ways yourself, right? But you're supposed to demonstrate at least 3 ways of creating shapes other than
Yes, sir.
okay.
Yes,
All right.
sir. Thank you.
So let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Corey, do you have any questions before we get to talking about reviewing for the quiz tonight?
Sorry, I'm in mommy mode, but no, sir, not as of now.
Okay.
I think I was just here for the quiz review or
Okay.
questions of the quiz.
That is fine. That is totally fine. Okay, so let's continue with shared screen, but instead of looking at PowerPoints, let's look at the actual module first. So there are 2 main sources for you to look at as help for your for studying, and one would be the module for the study guide. And let me say, although the quiz opens tonight, you have until midnight on Saturday to do the quiz, right? And so on the study guide images, we have, hold on a second, is it opening? Now it's opening. So we have a set of images. Let's see where's the best place I can put my bar over there. All right. So we start with Elegy to the Spanish Republic, Robert Motherwell, Portrait of Paganini, which we've already been studying, Bust of Queen Nefertiti. Was that one that we had to? I think that might have been on the first quiz too. Victor Steele of Naram Sin, The Dying Lioness. That one's new. Diplon Amphora, La Meninas. Right. This one was on the first quiz, Achilles and Ajax Amphora by Ezekias. This is a new one, Donatello's David. Parthenon. So there were 3 architects that designed and built the Parthenon: Phidias, Ictinus, Callicrates. Phidias was the head architect, which is interesting because he was primarily the sculptor, but he was considered the person who had the vision for the project. And then the Pantheon, that's a tricky one. Remember that we have 2 works of important architecture from the ancient world, right? One is called the Parthenon with an R, and one is called the Pantheon. And then lastly, Chartres Cathedral. Okay, so, and in these here, right, we have all the information you need to know for an identification except one, right? Sometimes we actually have an extra bit of information. Like right here, we have both the title of the work, we have the artist who made it, Jean-Auguste Dominique Ang, right? We have the date, but we also have the description that it is a pencil drawing. It is a graphite pencil drawing. And that is technically two pieces of information because it both answers the question that it's a drawing and it also answers the question of like what specific materials it's using, right? This one also has a piece of information, right? It says bust of Queen Nefertiti, New Kingdom Egyptian, 1350. Plus, we also have limestone and stucco. But we could add more information to that. We could say that it's a freestanding in the round, although probably not fully in the round sculpture, and so it is a work of sculpture, right? So just that is a point right there. So it's a work of sculpture. It's in the round, freestanding, and we might actually also get to the point that it is it's the fact that it's a bust is in the title. And then lastly, you might be able to mention that this is from the Amarna period, and that is in part one of the reasons why her anatomy is a little bit kind of extra elongated and kind of elegant and exaggerated, like especially that exaggerated long neck, right? Is in part because of the fashion of that particular time, the Amarna period in Egyptian art. You might also mention the fact that this was probably, because we discovered it in a sculpture studio and because of some other features, it probably was not meant to be used as um, a finished and public work of art. Instead, it was meant to live in the sculpture studio as essentially like a snapshot. It's supposed to be an image that the sculptors can use to then make more finished, more formal sculptures of Nefertiti. Um, Anyone remember who Nefertiti was married to, who the pharaoh was at this period? The answer is Akhenaten. So, and by the way, sometimes you can write answers in the chat. I don't have the chat pulled up at the moment, but you could definitely do that if you want to. Okay, so for each of these, we want to be able to say something about them, right? So we could start with just what medium they are, right? Elegy of the Spanish Republic is a painting. The Portrait of Paganini is a drawing. The bust of Queen Nefertiti is a sculpture. Victor Stele of Naram Sin is also a sculpture. In this case, it is a relief sculpture, right? The Dying Lioness is also a sculpture. It's a relief sculpture. In fact, it's a great example of what we call bas relief or low relief. The Diplon Amphora is a piece of ceramics, right? It's a ceramic pot, specifically an archaic form of amphora. La Meninas is a painting, specifically an oil painting. Once again, Achilles and Ajax Amphora is a piece of ceramics. You could just say ceramics or pottery or both. Donatello's David is a sculpture. It is also a bronze sculpture, which means it's therefore a cast or an indirect kind of sculpture. If you remember, we divided sculpture up into three main categories. Category one was additive sculpture. Category two was reductive sculpture. Category three was indirect, or otherwise known as casting. Okay. So the art medium here for the Parthenon is architecture. Same with the Pantheon, and same with Chartres Cathedral. Okay, so just simply getting that would then give you all 4 points, right? Just if you could remember the medium for each one of these, that would give you all 4 points. Next, though, if you can say anything else about the work, then you might be able to get extra credit points. So I talk a lot about the Elegy of the Spanish Republic. I've talked about it a couple of times. I talked about it in the lecture on figure ground. I've talked about it in the very first lecture on kind of like expression. But then I talked about it in the lecture about representation. And I really got into the whole thing of like What is the Spanish Republic? What is it referring to? And what is an elegy? Does anyone know what an elegy is? I don't think anyone's seen that video yet. Zaria, do you know what an elegy is? Everybody's being quiet. Noah, do you know the answer to the question?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. So an elegy, right, is a poem like that usually goes along with a funeral, right? It shares the same root as the word eulogy, right? An elegy is a poem or a song that you sing about the dead, right? It's a poem that you make about the dead, or you make in honor of the dead, and especially like something that you would read out at a funeral. Okay, so this is kind of like a funerary poem for the Spanish Republic. So does anyone know what the Spanish Republic was? So in the 30s, right? This is right before the start of World War II. In the 30s, the monarchy fails in Spain, and basically for a brief period, Spain was a republic. But there were certain forces in Spain that were well funded by the Nazis and the fascists, certain forces that didn't want Spain to be a republic because they feared if it was a republic, it would be dominated by leftists, primarily like the socialists and the communists, and everyone's like, we can't have that. So, and then that led to a civil war where a particular leader, Franco, led the fascist side to kind of fight against the Spanish Republic. And in the end, the fascists win and the Spanish Republic dies. In fact, Franco was of all the World War II fascist leaders, right? He was the only one to have survived past the end of World War II, and he stayed in power until I think the mid 60s. Okay, so that's a good deal that we could say about the elegy of the Spanish Republic. If you want more, go ahead and watch that lecture on representation, and that's Unit 3, and that's like the final lecture of that unit. Okay, and let's move on. So we've talked about Portrait of Paganini. There's a lot to say about this one, but I think just simply knowing that A, it's a drawing, B, it's a pencil drawing, C, uses changes of line weight. It combines both. It's primarily a line drawing, but it also uses a certain amount of tone. And that it's a portrait of a famous violinist, which you would kind of guess from the fact that he's standing there holding a violin. Paganini was just about the most famous musician in the entire world during his lifetime. He was like, everyone was astounded by him. Okay, we've already gone over enough about the bust of Queen Nefertiti. So what can we say about the Victory Stele of Naram Sin? Okay, so first of all, what is a stele? Anyone know what a stele is?
I don't, sir.
Okay. So a stele is a stone marker that's like a standing stone that's been carved, and it's usually set up someplace to kind of mark some achievement, some event. And then in most of the ancient world, it was generally used for like marking, this is where we had this amazing battle and we won. And so this is a stele of Naram Sin. Naram Sin is the grandson of Sargon of Akkad. So he's not, so Sargon of Akkad founded the dynasty. Naram Sin is the third, right, in the dynasty. And he did quite well. He kind of expanded the empire beyond the regions of Sargon. And the Akkadian Empire never was as big as it was again as under Naram Sin. So victory stele, so it's a stele, which is a stone marker. Victory meaning it's to commemorate a military battle. And so it's a good example of relief sculpture. And I would say it's low relief, but it's a little bit of, it's kind of an ambiguous region because although it's not that high off the surface, right? It's only like maybe 3, 4 inches off the surface, but the figures are pretty rounded, meaning that there's a lot of carved back where the sculptor carves all the way to the backside and like kind of around the backside of the figure. There's a good deal of that. And that's usually one of the hallmarks of high relief, but I don't think it's nearly high enough to count as high relief. But you could actually get a whole lot of points if you discussed all of that, like why it's low relief, but why it's kind of like high relief would be a lot of points. Um, and it's also a great example of hierarchical scale, right? In that Naram Sin is much bigger than all the other people. Notice like he's the largest, and then his army is bigger than the army he's defeating. His generals are slightly bigger than his other soldiers. It's very kind of clearly set. All right. Dying Lioness. So it's Neo-Assyrian. We already have one piece of information right there in the title. It was found at the palace of Ashurbanipal, Nineveh. Another thing you might know is that it is still to this day located at the British Museum of Art. So that's 2 right there. Then the fact that it's a sculpture, that's 3, and that it is relief sculpture, that's 4. If you add to it also that it's limestone, carved limestone, which makes it also reductive sculpture, right? We're up to like 6 or 7, and we haven't even talked about what it's about. So in the palace, Ashurbanipal, who was the king of kings in the Assyrian Empire at this time, he he had like 2 main themes. Like as you walk towards the throne room, and you're flanked on either side by these carvings on the walls, right? And there were 2 main themes. One theme was Ashurbanipal at war, and where he just shows you just how brutal and vicious and awful a warrior he is, and how terrifying his army is, how terrifying going against him is. And then the other side is Ashurbanipal hunting lions. And so hunting lions was even going all the way back to ancient times, but even at this point, 640 BCE, it was still considered it was the duty of a king, it was the honor of a king, right? Like only kings were allowed to hunt lions, but it was also the duty of the king, right? Like the king that was part of their job, was to do things like if a village said, we're being raided by this lion, call the king, and the king comes to kill the lion. At this time, Ashurbanipal was not doing a lot of that kind of service, going from village to village, but instead was mostly hunting lions in kind of like game preserves. But he was still periodically doing the job to prove that he was the guy. Um, and then the other thing I talk about, I haven't talked about it yet in one of the lectures, but I will be talking about this later on, is the communication of suffering here in this image, and how interesting and perplexing it is to us, because the Assyrians themselves have no real reason why they might want to make this creature look sympathetic, make us want to feel for it. Like, because think about one of the things you don't see here is that this lioness here, she's dragging herself over to her mate, the male lion, who has also been killed, right? She's dragging herself over to him, and she's dragging herself by her front paws because these arrows have gone through her spine, right? So her entire back legs are completely paralyzed, right? And so it's incredibly kind of sympathetic, kind of pathetic, like in the sense of pathos, right? It's hard not to have empathy for um, this dying lioness. But why would the sculptors have done this that way, right? Like that, it doesn't, like one answer might be that to the ancient Assyrians, making her suffering seem as real and as as suffering as possible shows how tough they are. Another theory is that most of the artisans who worked for the Assyrians were not themselves Assyrians. The Assyrians were known for basically stealing people, like wherever they went and conquered, they would steal all the craftsmen, all the best craftsmen, and they'd bring them to their capitals, right? So the people who were working on this were, in a way, captive slave labor. And so maybe the people who made this had other reasons to be sympathetic to someone who was being beaten up by Ashurbanipal. Okay, so that's a lot. Probably too much to put into one test answer. Okay, the Diplon amphora. So it is it's ceramics. So there we go. We got points. It is an example of Greek geometric period. Okay. And let's see. Oh, it shows a funerary scene, right? There's which I believe is from the Iliad, right? And it's from something from Homer, definitely. So there's a funeral right here in the center. And then they're quite large. I can't remember exactly. I think that one is like over 4 feet tall. It's pretty darn big. Oh, in terms of what kind of pottery, it's terracotta. Um, it is earthenware, right? Which means the same thing, terracotta and earthenware. And then they painted it with a black slip to make all the as the glaze, right? There's a black slip, and then they kind of like polish it to give it a little bit of a shine. Okay, La Meninas. So it's an oil painting. So there's 2 points right there because it's a painting, but also specifically it's an oil painting. It's a Baroque Spanish oil painting, right? By Diego Velázquez. And in it, he's showing us a scene from the court of Spain. He was the court painter of Spain, right? And he's kind of showing us this scene. And if you want more about this painting, because I go into a ton of depth on this painting, the lecture in the end of Unit 2 on narrative, right, where I talk about telling stories. The lecture at the end of Unit 2, I go into a lot of great detail about this painting and give you a lot of information that you could say about it to get extra points beyond what I've already told you, which is a good deal. You already get a bunch of extra credit points from that. Okay, so once again, this is Greek ceramics. It is terracotta painted with a black slip. It is specifically black figure style. And this one is especially prized because, like, oftentimes in black figure style, the line work done with where a stylus, like a metal stylus, is scratching away the lines. The line work is pretty pretty minimal, right? It's just kind of supporting the figures. But in this one, with the hair and the patterning on these drapes and some other places, the line work is extremely detailed and decorative. That's one of the reasons why this particular amphora is prized. It's telling a story. It's a story from the Iliad, right? And in which right before a battle, Achilles and Ajax are like, they're waiting for the battle to start. So they're playing a game of dice. And part of the point of this is just to kind of like show like the ideal of the Greek warrior that, like, they, in the face of, this terror, they're about to go into this serious, intense battle. They can just be like, all right, let's just relax and chit chat. Okay, Donatello's David. So it's cast bronze, it's freestanding sculpture, it's in the round, right? Being cast bronze means that it is also an indirect sculpture. And so that's like 4 pieces of information right there. It is an image of David from the Bible, and he's standing there. This is not like a lot of the images of David where he's with the sling, the weapon that actually kills Goliath. In fact, or actually, he doesn't, right? He doesn't kill Goliath with the sling. He hits Goliath with the sling and it knocks him out, right? But then he comes along, he grabs Goliath's sword and he chops the head off. And that's the thing that actually kills Goliath. So in this image, that we don't see the sling anywhere. right? Or the stone. What we see though is the sword, and we see Goliath's head is chopped off, and he's standing there looking very proud of himself with one leg on top of Goliath's head. It is, I believe, the first freestanding bronze sculpture post the Roman era. And what else? So it's Italian Renaissance, and it's a great example of contrapposto. Remember when we were talking about Greek sculpture, we talked about that particular kind of stance, contrapposto, where your hips and your shoulders are kind of counterbalanced to each other. And there you go. It is a fantastic example of just that. Okay, so that's like 6 or 7 different pieces of information on Donatello's David. Okay, the Parthenon. Parthenon is a Greek architecture. It is a Doric temple, right? It's Doric style. We know it's Doric because the columns are pretty wide. They don't have any bases, right? The capitals are very simple. They're a simple Doric style, right? So it's Doric architecture. It has a frieze on the outside. Like all Doric temples, the frieze is made up, the outside frieze is made up of triglyphs and metopes. I talk about that in the lecture on Greek art history, where we talk about Greek temples, and it has a pediment. Interestingly enough, the sculptures of the pediment are not here with the building. They are once again at the British Museum because the Brits have stolen everything. What else can we say? It was a classical, right? So this is the classical period. So, and it's in Athens. Trying to think if there's anything else to say about it. It's on top of the Acropolis, and like all, pretty much like all Greek temples with columns, the columns exhibit entasis, which is the slight swelling and then tapering of the column. And the word Parthenon means Temple of the Maidens. So like the full name of it would be something like the Temple of Athena Parthenos, right? Otherwise known as the Temple of Athena of the Maidens. Okay. So then we have the Pantheon, which is Roman, and it's in Rome. So there you go. We got a point right there. It's a bit of a shock that it's in Rome. It is the primarily done in the Corinthian system, but the Romans didn't hold so much to like a single system. But the front columns of the building are Corinthian columns. It has a blank pediment, and the interior is a dome supported by archways, right? And the dome has a center hole to it that's called an oculus. And the name Pantheon basically means all the gods or to all the gods. And we're pretty sure the reason it has that name is that like it was a temple that was used to worship a number of the important gods of the Roman Republic or of the Roman city and the Roman Empire. But they also included some spaces for other gods and for just kind of like the generic other gods. Here we may worship all the other gods kind of thing. And that's why it has kind of this title of Pantheon, as in it's the temple of all the gods. Okay. Interestingly enough, we don't know the real name of the Pantheon. The name Pantheon is kind of a nickname, but we don't know what the official title name for the temple was. Okay, and then we have Chartres Cathedral. So it is Gothic French. It's located in Chartres, France. And what else? Well, we could talk about the fact that it's a great example of Gothic ribbed vaulting, where the arches are pointed arches. And also, it's a great example of a building that has flying buttresses on the outside that support the weight, which allows it to really soar as high as it does. And it's very early. It's like the very earliest Gothic building was Saint Denis, but Chartres Cathedral is pretty early in the Gothic period, and a bit of a high point as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so that pretty much gives. Now, a lot of these you can find more information, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I gave you all at least, 4 to 5 things per image that you could say for each one. And remember, the more you can say, the more points you can earn. So that's that. Let's now look at the other part of the study guide, which is so besides the images, the other part of the study guide is a Word document. And it has pay no attention to the fact that it says test number 1. It used to be test number 1, but it's become and actually the quiz is gonna be just a little bit shorter than it is described here, just so you know. I pulled a couple of questions here or there, but basically following the same structure. Okay, so slide identification, and I give you a list of all the artworks, which is the same list as what we just looked at. I also give you the rules by which, how close your spelling needs to be and how close your dates need to be. Okay. And then there will also be some slide reactions, and there will also be some extra credit slide identifications. Okay. And remember, with the slide reactions, the images you see for that section may not be ones you have been prepared for at all. They may be total surprises. But the goal is for you to at least be able to look at that and go, oh, yeah, that's a painting of some sort. Or maybe go, that's a painting, and I think maybe it's a Renaissance painting. Or that's a sculpture, and maybe it's an Egyptian sculpture. And if you're right about one of those things, you get the point. If you're right about both of those things, you get extra credit points. So, okay, and then there will be some extra credit slide identifications. And then there will be some. Now, I think there are a few fill in the blank questions. Mostly it's going to be multiple choice, but these fill in the blank questions will kind of like be the basis for those questions. And then there's some definitions. I'll ask you, I think two definitions. I would highly recommend knowing line weight, hierarchy and emphasis, negative space, and proportion. Those are probably the most likely ones. And then, so some of these I will use where I'll just ask you to write definitions, and other ones of these I'll use in like a matching situation where you match them to their definition. Okay. And then there will be maybe it says one. Yeah, I think there's just one short answers. So of these, there'll be a short paragraph, right? A short paragraph question where in a short paragraph you answer one of these questions. Okay. And then there will also be a slide comparison where you compare at 2 works. And in fact, actually, I can tell you it's going to happen twice. There's going to be comparing 2 works of art in terms of how they use line. And the first time it's going to be 2 works of art that you should know very, very well because I've already talked about them a lot. And then it'll be 2 other works that are kind of different from those, but have similar differences between each other, also in terms of how they use the line. Okay. Anything you want to see on that or anything you want me to go over? Has everyone already looked at these questions and knows the answer to these questions?
Looked at, yes. Not quite done though.
Okay. All right. I mean, almost all of them are coming from the homeworks. So they And remember, most of the answers from the homeworks come either from the notes for the lectures or from the video lectures themselves. So, and then there'll be certain questions that are specifically from the readings, and they usually tell you they're from the readings. Okay, let's look at the slide comparison for a second. And I think we had Unit 2. I think we might have to pull up Unit 1. Yep. Okay, so on the slide comparison, we're going to get slide comparisons in terms of line twice, right? You're going to get these two, right? That you should be well warned about, right? And then you're going to get two others where they're going to be less familiar to you, but you're going to have to try to compare them in terms of how they use line as well. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. So in terms of line, there are some major differences. One, right, they both primarily use line, right, and use change of line weight to make value, but one of them has a certain amount of tone to it, the portrait of Paganini, and the other one doesn't, right? The Rico Lebrun image has no tone whatsoever. It's just purely a line drawing. Okay, so that's comparison number one. Comparison number two, they both use changes of line weight, but they do them in very different degrees, amounts, and very different ways. So in the Portrait of Paganini, the change of line weight is much more subtle, right? But also, it's not just a change in the thickness of the line, it's also, more importantly, a change in the value of the line, right? Like, because with a pencil, when you press lightly, you can make a very faint light mark. And when you press really hard, you can make a much darker mark, right? So that the line actually changes in value. Whereas on the Lebrun, since it's done in ink with brush, all of these lines are the exact same value to each other. One line might look a little bit lighter than another, but that's just the illusion of the fact that thinner lines look lighter, but they're not actually lighter. They're just thinner, right? So the change in line weight is entirely created in terms of the difference in width, right? The scale of the mark between thin lines versus thick lines. But then the degree, the amount of change is much more. Okay, so that's like really 2 or 3 points right there. So we covered A, one has tone just a little bit, one is a pure line drawing. B, they both use change of line weight, but they do it differently. The portrait of Paganini, the line weight changes not very much in width, but does change significantly in value. Whereas in the Lebrun is much more exaggerated. The difference between the thin lines and the thick lines is much greater, but the change is only in the width of the line, not in the value of the line. Okay, does that make sense? All right, next, in terms of lines, which one has lines that that use cross contours? Well, they both do, but it's much more subtle in the Paganini. Like, let's zoom in on a section here, right? Like we can see some marks like in here, and there are marks around there where we're kind of making marks that wrap around the form and create cross contour lines. But in general, it's much lighter, it's very supportive, and it's kind of subtle. Whereas in the Lebrun, the lines are much more much more obviously creating cross contour lines, like the way they wrap around the body of the figure here. And that in part is because of what this drawing is about compared to what this drawing is about, right? Like this drawing is very much about his mass like that he's a big guy, right? And his body is a really important part of this drawing. Whereas in this drawing, the violin is more important than his body, right? Like his body is only kind of sort of there. But what's more important is his presence is there with his face, and his violin is there. Okay. So that's three main points. Point number four, how does the use of line relate to hierarchy and emphasis? Well, in the Portrait of Paganini, pretty much everywhere that he wants us to see more emphasis, he increases the use of tone, and he has also strongly increases the amount of value contrast. So he gets darker with his lines and the hatching and cross-hatching of his lines. He builds up darker value. So we have the most amount of value contrast and the most use of tone here on the head part of the portrait. And then we also have a good deal of use of value contrast and tone here on the hands and on the violin. But then other parts are left mostly just a few lines. The Lebrun does kind of the opposite. It uses really a lot of very heavy lines, especially around the body. And that really draws a lot of attention to the body. But then the way that it creates contrast on the face and also draws our attention to the face in contrast to the body, right? Because in the Lebrun, it's much more about the both of those two things, or the kind of the contrast between those two things, the body and the kind of the mind represented by the face. So he draws our attention into the head and the face by switching and using really almost entirely super thin lines, right? Like no longer using hardly any of these really big, heavy lines. And that difference really kind of zooms us in to the face. Okay, so that's a number of things that are different. I talked about the change of line weight. We could also talk about gesture. There's an element of gesture to both drawings, but the drawing by Ang of Paganini is much more controlled, whereas the drawing by Rico Lebrun is definitely much more gestural, especially in the parts kind of like in the lower body, where he's like just really kind of letting loose, right? Okay, so you will have these two to look at on the test, right? So be prepared. And then you'll have two others that are similar to these. And so, but not exactly the same. So it'll force you to have to really think. Okay. Anything else about the quiz? Do any of you have any other questions? Oh, I do have one other thing I want to show you related to the quiz. And that is, let's see, there we go. On the YouTube page, so there are various playlists, and one of the playlists is called Reviews of Tests and Papers. Okay. And so there's these two reviews right here. Review for test number one. Of course, that's actually pretty much the exact same as what we're doing quiz number two. Okay. And then I'll also review of test number one from fall of 21. Oh, and then I cover the comparison question all on its own right there. And also I cover the extra credit questions. And let's see, is there any others that are related to test number one? Oh, here's another one. That one is, I can't remember when that's from, but also from test number one and part two. And so when we get to the midterm, might want to look at those midterm review videos. And then right here is the study session that I did for the last quiz, right? For quiz number one. And that was just done 6 days ago. And I will post this video also tomorrow morning, and that will be on that list as well. Okay. So this is a resource for you that you can watch those videos, and they will kind of help you to make sure that you're ready, you've studied properly. All right, it's almost 8 o'clock. Any questions? Noah, I think we lost Cora entirely. Noah, do you have any questions for me?
No, sir. I got all my questions answered.
Okay, good. All right. Zaria, do you have any questions? Do you feel better prepared for the quiz?
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Okay. Now, for both of you, let me also remind you, don't forget that the quiz is broken up into parts, right? And so look at each part, right? And then make sure that you study, like you can study and study for a while, but then when you're feeling kind of ready, go to the part one, look at it and go, okay, what is going to be covered on this? And then re-review that material right ahead of then taking it. Make sure that you're prepared for that section. I break it up into parts in part to benefit you, right? A, so that you have more flexibility. You can do one part here and another part at another time. But it also helps you in that you don't have to cram everything. You can kind of like focus on this stuff and then focus on the next thing. And I think the way it goes is like the first one is the slide identifications and the slide reactions. Then the second one is the short answer questions. And then the third one is the long questions that include like the slide comparison questions. And then the last part four, is the extra credit. Okay.
Oh,
Um, so any other questions besides that?
no.
All right. Well, then you guys have a good night. And I'll be sending emails to you, I'm sure, tomorrow to let people know various things.
You too, sir.
All right. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.